As we move into the next phase of our cybersecurity consulting methodology, we're going to be looking at how we can standardize and measure across the client's enterprise organization. So within this phase, we're going to be looking for organizations to define benchmarks and standards for all of their technologies. These are going to be kind of their minimum configuration standards that they've kind of defined for any new technologies that they're going to implement into their environment. And you may be surprised that though they may have these standards, they may not be documented, and only one or two people may actually know what those standards are across the IT organization, depending on the size of the company. So once defined, the team then works to build a mechanism to measure the environment against these standards. So, this is going to be a process. Some organizations may already have this, things to look at. So an approach for this, the consultant works with the client's team to implement the following approach for this initiative. And we're going to get into the work elements here of review existing program management processes, and then being able to provide recommendations, risk ratings, and so forth. So let's get into it. Standardize and measure. So initiating this phase, we're looking at centralization of all previous security findings. After you have performed the previous steps, the organization will understand whether the scope and breadth of the previous assessments that have been performed were adequate to support the development of the security program moving forward. Do those previous assessments, if there were any, align to the standards and configurations and those minimum requirements that you've defined? Did it showcase that they were meeting those? Did they follow a specific framework in those assessments? How were those done? So if not, you're able to choose the appropriate standard practice framework, such as a NIST CSF, or 853, ISO, PCI, depends on what you're looking at for the organization, what requirements they're facing, and fall under for the type of data that they are managing. So you're going to be selecting one of those frameworks in order to conduct an assessment against. And you're going to want to make sure that the assessment is distributed to all of the necessary elements or divisions or business units within an organization. And an example of this would just be saying, like in a large health system, there may actually be multiple hospitals that participate or fall under the governance of the policies, processes, and standards set by the organization. So the assessment and the scoping of the assessment is always crucial when working with clients, so making sure they understand what's in scope, what is not, so that you can get your time estimates appropriate for your budgeting requirements. At this point, don't let great be the enemy of good. At the same time, it makes sure that the scope is comprehensive. The goal is to improve findings so that they include measurement of the full scope of the security program, as well as the appropriate security domains, right? So things to think about there. What is that really going to encompass when you're looking at the scope? If you're talking about 10 different hospital systems in scope, are you going to be walking each of those, checking for physical security items and how well they are participating in the security policies and procedures that have been defined for them? So all of those things are going to come into play as you define the scope and start looking at this assessment that you're going to get further into. So your second main work element here is going to be review existing program management processes and provide recommendations. So throughout this work element, You're going to look to evaluate the existing processes within the client environment for compliance against regulatory requirements using that NIST CSF framework, or whichever one of the frameworks that you're looking to align to, right? Again, looking and depending on what the organization does for their business, they may fall under certain regulatory requirements, state and federal, and all of those would need to be reviewed as a part of this assessment to make sure they're in compliance with all of those mandates. So this is really going to get into including the measurement of any existing security management processes, as well as the performance of those and the measurement capabilities used for providing any type of key performance indicators into the security program, which, should be something that gets highlighted to management in that organization on a regular basis. And once reviewed, the business functional and technical requirements will be developed for both the future program management process and supporting network monitoring architecture and services that support it as well. So looking at the deliverables for this work element is your existing enterprise security gap report. So you're going to conduct that assessment, walking through all of those compliance requirements, identifying how well the organization is meeting those requirements, and then establishing that in an enterprise security gap report. It provides all of those findings and then associated IT security management processes and monitoring infrastructure that can be implemented to remediate and mitigate those security risks. So that program management and security monitoring requirements document, this document actually illustrates the business, functional, and technical requirements that align to the needs of the client for the security program management and monitoring infrastructure. So this document fuels the remaining work elements for your consulting engagement. This process, heads down, and again, it just depends on where you're at in working through these and your experience level, but it may take a couple weeks to conduct this initial gap assessment. So we're going to get further into all of these documents and this process within the Standardize and Measure methodology. And here we're going to discuss the security program development aspects of it. So many organizations are interested in the development of security programs for their environment, but are unsure where to start, right? So this is where consulting opportunities come into play. Organizations of many sizes need this assistance. Many organizations will not directly hire security personnel to do this because it may not be a 40-hour a week gig year round. So you can take on some of these projects and knock out some of these consulting opportunities for these organizations. Identifying and organizing all previous governance, risk, and compliance findings is always important because it enables that organization to understand who and what has been measured, the associated story for those findings, as well as good indicator of current state, right? And as you're looking at all of those past reportings and findings, you're likely going to be able to identify right away if they have remediated them just based on their responses to those. And this step is absolutely critical in order to start the process for informing management with the information they need to make informed decisions about how to move forward. Getting an idea of the current state starts to put certain projects into perspective on where they're at, what they need to focus on first, before maybe advancing to other projects and funding other projects based on understanding the current state of their security. So at this point, the person driving this development effort must act as the educated security leader and provide the best options for the business to move forward based on the current state the organization is currently in. Now, this is always crucial coming from a consulting background and perspective, Focus on the business, what's right for the business. That's a living, breathing entity that must survive in all costs. So what you're going to be recommending needs to be practical for that business. Many technology-driven consultants love their solutions and love their tools to a point that organizations can't keep up with that and maintain that. So make sure what we're recommending is always going to be relevant to that organization. These operational leaders in security or not are required to look at the current situation and provide the best options available from the data to move forward. So, something to understand and pitch with that from the management perspective is once they're aware of the security risks that their organization is facing, they have to make that educated decision on how to act on those. If they elect to do nothing and to take no action on any of the, say, high-risk findings that come out of the assessments that get presented to them, then in the event of a breach of their customers' data or, their clients' data, they are going to have to report negligence, and the fines for that start to get very hefty. So it's a very quick Google to start looking at information on, reporting negligence in a breach and what it means for the rates and the fines. So if you want to put some frightening data in front of a client, that's a quick Google search. So most of the time these days, organizations are aware of the security risks that are out there and are not needing the education piece behind it to take actual action. Moving forward on to identify and secure a security program structure. So the security program structure needs to be designed and offered for options with different variations up to management. There are many different types of security program structures that can work in varying situations. Maybe an organization is a large health system with many individual hospitals and each having their own internet connection, each having their own security program or security personnel driving activities at that site. In this situation, it may make sense to build a highly distributed security program structure with regional security teams and governance due to the nature and the risk distribution. So that's just an example. There are multiple security programs that can be applied with varying pros and cons to any business. Many organizations are much smaller. They're going to just have, a single security individual or a small team of security individuals. We have information or presentations that you can find on our YouTube channel about the structure of a security program and the resources and talents that you need to run that. But anyway, the point is in these security programs, you have to make it make sense for the business. So depending on the size and structure of the business, maybe they just are looking for outsourcing consulting so that their CTO doesn't have to do all the heavy security lifting. And you can maintain that security program also almost acting as a security officer, virtual security officer outsourced to them. So, depending on the size and structure, there's different variations that are going to take place. Just understand that we're going to walk through some scenarios so that you can understand the different variances that are out there. Our research has shown that executive management responds better when these options are provided with clear pros and cons, and these potential options supported by the information you've collected to this point. During step 3, an organization has collected the necessary information to support the development of a custom-fit security program for their organization. We're searching for a maturity level 3 in supporting the business. in building it and then leading the way forward, right? As you're looking at your security assessments and defining a maturity for the security program, in many cases, it's on a 0 to 5, 1 to 5 scale. And we're looking for a security program to be at least operating at a maturity level of 3. So any areas we're lacking in there, we want to look at stepping up before we really start advancing in other areas. So from here, you're going to present the options with budget requirements to management for approval. Depending on what this is, you as the consultant are able to take your client partner through this process, providing your services, and present the information from all the previous steps that you've already done, develop the roadmap of options, present the presentation to give to the leadership and organization. Here you're looking to receive management approval on a program structure and some level of funding for a security program. Make sure that the management makes a decision, even if that decision is to do nothing at this point. A few expert tips here. Look to ensure to educate management on ways in which you can manage risk in your options, accept, transfer, or mitigate risk, right? There's different ways that a business can actually manage the risk variations. So when you're looking at those options, that's what you're looking at. Are they going to accept it, transfer it, mitigate it? Once leadership accepts a risk, chooses not to pursue remediation, make sure that it's not simply filed away indefinitely. Ensure that a collaboration includes reaffirming of accepted risks on some periodic time frame. Even CEOs change their mind about what is critical based on the world around them changing. So in many cases, you're looking for an annual renewal of any risk acceptance that has been done for the organization. So if there's an exception to policy, we're going to look at that exception every year to make sure that it's still a valid exception. Or, depending on the classification of that, we may, span those out depending on the size and how many numbers of those we would actually have to look at. So, depending on the risk level of that exception, we may put that on a longer cycle. But something to take a look at there. Here you're going to be looking at conducting an IT security gap assessment. So for your risk management is at the heart of any security program effort. You're really looking to manage risk and then streamline and create efficiencies in your data flow operations to reduce that risk and touch point as well. With understanding the risk architecture and the areas in which the organization is going to measure risk, the next step is to implement these processes so that the business can make informed decisions about risk moving forward. So risk management is one of the most important processes for a security program as you start to develop that. The more efficient these processes are, the better information you'll be able to give the business in the future. The better the information to make decisions, the better the decisions will often be. And really, this is just saying is that what you put into it is what you get out of it in any assessment. So if the organization isn't really looking to answer many questions or provide very many details, make sure they understand that you're a part of their team, and this is not an audit process. This is just something to be done and looked at internally, and become a part of that team membership so that they get more out of their assessment process with you. Determine that risk management framework adoption. So many organizations know that they're managing risk, but they don't actually have a risk management framework that anybody knows, understands, or has documented anywhere. So they get stuck on determining how to measure risk or who has the authority to manage, approve, or review, accept risk levels. So this step is only as difficult as one makes it. Really, the decision will be made here in order to support the development of a risk management process in the next steps. Once you have a structure that we provide to you here in the Consultants Network, it's very easy to present and put in front of somebody, and then, it's up to them to make the decision on authority levels and things of that nature. Conduct a risk assessment process. This process will develop and document all of the security controls, compliance requirements, business rules, and supporting tools for each area identified in the security framework. So again, depending on what security framework you elected to utilize, the NIST CSF, ISO, HIPAA, PCI, whatever it may be, you're going to follow that security framework in conducting your security assessment through all of those kind of characteristics of the framework. Enterprise-wide communication and reporting system. This is going to be key as you conduct that assessment, as you identify the gaps that are applicable to the organization, as is relevant to your assessment. How to communicate those gaps, report those gaps out, and get the right support that you need behind you within the organization to manage those. So you have to make people aware, and that's always a key part of it. So the first thing is to develop a repeatable system for organizing and then delivering information to the business in order to support the ability to make informed business decisions about security. So again, I'll reference back to the standard configuration guidelines. Most of the time, there's only one person in the organization knowing what those baseline requirements are. And having that documented is always key. Just as important, the second objective is to develop a repeatable security training and awareness program. All of these policies and procedures you're putting into place, how are anyone going to follow them if you don't train them on those requirements? So how do they access those policies? How do those processes then become applicable to those different business units across the organization? In regard to management reporting, there's often 3 themes that are recommended to be kept separate for very specific reasons. They include internal resource utilization on the security team, remediation project reporting to improve all overall environment, and incident management reporting. As you continue to work on that enterprise-wide communication and reporting system, the risk ownership and responsibility comes into play. And once the information about the current state has been provided to the leadership staff, it's at that point in the process when the accountability for security transitions to management, meaning they can now be held negligible, as we previously discussed, if no action is taken and a security breach occurs. The more you can educate and inform the business and the individuals within about your efforts, the quicker you'll be able to implement change and build a security-minded culture for the organization. And that's really the pinnacle, is getting everybody across the organization to understand that they play a role in security and building that security-minded culture. Your training and awareness program becomes the grease to propel the program forward. Your expert tip here is it should be noted that accountability for the security in the organization can only be transferred if the information was transferred in a meaningful way. If the presentation is too technical and not in a business appropriate format, this is the failure of the consultant or the infosec representative. You have to make it apply to the business, make the business understand the risks as it applies to them if something were to happen due to one of these risks being, or vulnerabilities being exploited or exposed. Expanding on the developing your security training and awareness program, it's really going to be the driver that kickstarts your security-minded culture across the enterprise. You're ready to implement a great deal of change into your environment after you start to look at all of those security gaps and the remediation that's going to take place and the changes that may need to incur that affect the end users. And it will require new actions by every person in the organization. Ensure you're providing proper training and awareness to drive security-minded culture. Keep everybody on the same page, understanding why the changes are occurring and why they're necessary for the business. Support educating and keeping the business appraised of new security movements. You need to build an effective security training awareness capability for the organization. This is where that is built. So we have tools available. There are a number of tools out there if organizations already do not have something in place to build off of for their security-minded culture, things that we can recommend from the consultants network as well. Your expert tips here is the security training and awareness capability should be a program that measures what messages should be delivered to whom, when, and how often this is occurring. Most healthcare organizations lean on an annual online training for security or HIPAA. This is just not going to get it done, as it's a real missed opportunity here for awareness training that should be present across the enterprise, for your daily operations. It should be ever present, not an annual only training. The most important aspect of this security training is to explain why in everything that you're asking the organization to do in regards to security. So why are you asking them to do it? Not just please go do it. Everybody, moves better as long as they're working from the same sheet of music. So don't keep all of the information private. Share why you're making these changes. I've never met an end user who would not change to incorporate security into their daily activities as long as they clearly understood why they were being asked to do it. One of the greatest struggles in health IT is end user acceptance, and IT security can often lead to increased burden on providers. Ensure that your training and awareness capability are able to assess and understand burden on end users, in addition to ensuring that your training and awareness activities teach about how to limit this burden as much as possible. Your security training and awareness capability should be used to influence the overall culture of your organization so that security measures are successful.